Freedom Fest, the world's biggest gathering of people who obsess about liberty. Tonight's topic, the American dream. Is it still achievable? Our guests are some people who've achieved it. The founder of Whole Foods, the head of the restaurant chain Carl's Jr., the person the Boston Globe calls the most powerful man in America. And first, the man who helped build modern Las Vegas and made himself a couple $1 billion doing it. Our topic, what's happened to the American dream? That's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
Thank you. The phrase, the American dream, came from a book written in the midst of the Depression. The author wrote, "America is that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone." And for many people, the dream has come true, but now I'm told something's wrong. The dream is no longer accessible. This summer, a poll asked people, is the American dream suffering or alive and well? And 75% said suffering. Is that true? I mean, what do you think, audience? How many of you think the American dream is still as achievable pretty much as it was before? How many of you feel not so much, it's changed? Pretty pessimistic. One man who people say has lived the American dream and created it for many others is the man who's been called the most powerful man in Las Vegas, and that's Steve Wynn, the founder of Wynn Resorts. They like you in this town.
Let's take a poll.
So you have made you're a self-made multi-billionaire, and how'd you do that? Because I'm told the town was seedy, you built hotels that were more appealing to people, but I would think a lot of people had that idea.
Ideas are easy. Saying it is easy. Doing it is difficult.
So what was difficult? What did you do that I couldn't do? I'm not a billionaire.
Well, first of all, I had the benefit of a fine high school prep education, and then I got to go to college. When my father died, we were broke. But
you were in debt, actually, $350,000 in the hole.
Correct. But I had everything that I needed to go forward and find a better life for myself. I wasn't burdened by Twitter and Facebook, so I preferred to make a real life for myself instead of a virtual one. But I got down to business. I only cared about getting on with it. Getting on with it. Hustling. Sooner or later, if you work hard enough, you'll get a break. I was interested in getting dug in, to getting started.
But you started as the slots manager of a hotel here.
Before that, I ran the bingo while I was at the University of Pennsylvania in Maryland.
This doesn't look like a route to the top.
It does not look like a route to the top, but I ran it. I had 60 employees when I was 16 years old. Now, when my dad died, that was the only thing that was left of the family business, and I was prepared to do it. I didn't worry about anything except making the bingo and the people that came to it have a better experience next week and the week after.
6 years after you were slots manager, you were chairman of the Golden Nugget Hotel.
I got lucky again. I got in a real estate deal with Howard Hughes, and I got a chance to run the place. It had 2 bars, a coffee shop, a bunch of slot machines and blackjack tables, and a gift shop, and a parking lot. And all of a sudden, I was dealing with the chief engineer and the chief financial officer and the slot manager and the restaurant manager. And I got to learn about how one of these places was put together and how it worked.
And you decided that Las Vegas was not in the gambling business.
No.
Sure looks like it to me.
All slot machines are the same anywhere in the world. I learned one thing about a casino. If people move through it, they keep going and money stays behind. So I came to the two conclusions simultaneously. First of all, get the people to go through it. But what brings people to a casino? People come to Las Vegas, and it's the same in China, or New Jersey, or Mississippi, to live life a little bigger than they do at home. And they come for the non-casino things, for the environment, which hopefully is clean and well done, it's tasteful, the lighting, and to be served well.
The lighting?
Lighting is very important wherever you go. You're emotionally affected by lighting and the sound of the place. The soundtrack is very important. So anyway, environment is everything.
Could you build it today the way you did?
Short answer, yes. We can make an argument that overregulation, Americans don't get a very good deal with their government. The HR in the government is not as good as it should be. There's overregulation. But the person that's got that gene, that go get 'em, it's happening right now, John. There are thousands of Americans every day finding their groove and making it. The thing that gets you that is inside you on day one. And you're not entitled to it. You got to go get it. And there are people in America getting it now. What things going on in Silicon Valley?
And I would agree, and I think that includes things like Facebook and Twitter, which crotchety old men like Bill O'Reilly and you are trashing here, but for this show,
we are.
I asked people who follow me on Twitter, is the American dream still alive? Joe Sanders said no. Government regulations and oppression stifle entrepreneurship. Too many barriers to business ownership. It would be tougher for you today, I assume.
Well, a lot of things have changed. But I am saying that besides Facebook and Twitter, which are so highly publicized, one thing about social media, it's allowed everybody to talk too much.
But people should talk to each other.
It's good to talk to each other, but not at the expense of wasting half of your life exchanging inanity. And I'm friendly with Rupert Murdoch, and we're associated in business in a real estate.
It's my boss.
Rupert, one day the Facebook guys stayed with me, the guys that started and owned the company. And they came to see me in the office at the Wynn, and they said, look, you've got to have, the Twitter guys, you've got to have a Twitter account, Steve. I said, what do I want a Twitter account for? I have absolutely no interest in sharing what I do every day with a group of strangers. No, you don't understand, Steve. You could have a platform. Rupert Murdoch does it. I said, he does not. They were sitting on the couch in my office, the two owners of Twitter. I got up from the chair opposite them. I went to my desk, picked up my cell phone, hit the speed dial, and got them. I said, hey, Rupert, the two guys that are here from Twitter, they tell me you got a Twitter account. He said, I do, Steve. I said, you do? Yes. He says, and I have 247,000 followers. He didn't say 250 approximately. He said 247. I was speechless. The two guys on the couch are going, I said, why do you do that? He said, every once in a while when I'm not doing anything, I tweet something out. Well, I was checkmated. He said, you should try it. I said, I'll see you later. And it shows you that I don't really know what I'm talking about.
Thank you, Steve Wynn. Next, another man who worked his way to the top, helped make a company extra successful. The man responsible for these weird and lurid sexual ads.
What's more American than a cheeseburger? This cheeseburger, loaded with a hot dog and potato chips. In the hands of all-American model Samantha Hoops. In a hot tub. In a pickup truck, driven by an American bull rider. On an aircraft carrier. Under the gaze of Lady Liberty. As she admires the most American thick burger. New at Carl's Jr. and Hardee's.
The man in charge of Carl's Jr. and Hardee's is Andy Puzder. When he took over, the company was in debt. Just 4 years later, they were making hundreds of millions of dollars. Now you employ 70,000 Americans. What did you do that your predecessor didn't?
Hardee's was in trouble. The food wasn't any good, the service was bad, and the restaurants were dirty. So I knew what the problem was right away.
But were they stupid? Were they lazy? What was going on?
They were entrenched. Matter of fact, my second memo as CEO was the next person that answers a question with something to the effect of, because we've always done it that way, will be fired. Just to let you know how bad things were, my first memo was no more people behind the counter unless they have all their teeth. So it was a... It was a situation that needed to be addressed. But once we got the restaurant straightened out, we still had a problem, which was only elderly people felt comfortable at Hardee's. People didn't feel like it was a restaurant for them. So we needed to change, and we did that with an advertising campaign. We wanted to appeal to young people, so we targeted young, hungry guys. If you've seen our ads, you know that we target young, hungry guys. And that worked very well.
And you don't worry that someone from the government's anti-discrimination task force is going to say, you have to hire a certain number of people with no teeth?
Yeah, well, actually it's funny, being a lawyer myself, I knew enough not to ask the legal department if I could send that memo out because they would have told me no. So we sent it out anyway, and it seemed to work just fine.
You started in the business scooping ice cream at Baskin & Robbins.
I did. Minimum wage, $1 an hour. I never thought I could support a family of 4 on that wage, but it was... And I learned a lot. I learned about customer service. I learned about inventory. That was a good background for me, a good start, a good first step on that ladder.
You painted houses, you cut lawns. Now there are new rules about the age when people can work and the minimum wage, of course. People view this as, this is just fair for people. You can't pay them so little. Well,
I tell you, I have a 16-year-old son, and I really love him. There's no way in the world I'd pay that kid $12 an hour to do something. We're losing a generation of people because we've eliminated the jobs that those people normally filled. How do you pay somebody $15 an hour to scoop ice cream? How good could you be at scooping ice cream? It's just not a job where you could compensate somebody like that.
And in a few cities, that's about to be the minimum.
How do you lift everybody in this country to $15 an hour and not have areas where there are economic problems? We need to create jobs. People need jobs. They need the opportunity that comes with work. They need the dignity of work. That's what I experienced. That's what Steve Wynn experienced. That's what I'm sure most of you experienced. If you don't have that, you miss something, you lose something. And when the government steps in and tries to control these things, we lose jobs. The only way that you can reduce poverty and increase opportunity is economic growth. That's it. The government can't do it. You need economic growth. And there's one system in the history of the world that produces enough economic growth to meaningfully reduce poverty and meaningfully increase opportunity, and that's free market capitalism.
Which is under attack by well-intended regulation. How long does it take you to get permission to open a restaurant?
We have restaurants in 33 countries and 45 states. And in Texas, it's 60 days.
Which is the success, but it's still 2 months.
Yeah. Shanghai, China, 63. Okay? In Russia, we opened a restaurant on Karl Marx Prospect, so Karl Marx Avenue in Novosibirsk, which is in Siberia, in 125 days. In LA, it takes 280. I can open a restaurant faster in Siberia than I can in California. And
what are the rules? What do they want to know, or what do they demand?
The permitting is ridiculous. They make us put in stoplights and curb cuts and plant trees, 2 blocks away. Everybody on the planet wants input. You got to get approvals from the city, approvals from the county, approvals from the state. You have to satisfy federal regulatory requirements. We now have a single-spaced list of federal, state, and local requirements that we hand out for every restaurant we open in California. That's, I think, 14 or 16 single-spaced pages. You can't grow, you can't build restaurants, you can't build a new Walmart, you can't build that new grocery store, that new office building, if you can't use the land, if you can't get through the regulatory process.
Thank you for fighting that, Andy
My pleasure.
Puzder. Coming
Thanks,
up. Next, some people say, hey, it's easy for us to say. The American dream is achievable because we're white. We're white men. it's different for women and blacks. Is it? That's next. We're back at Freedom Fest. Now, it's easy for me to say the American dream is alive because I'm a white guy. Yeah, my parents were immigrants who came to America dead broke and didn't even speak English, but they worked hard and made it. But again, they were white. It's much easier for white people, I'm told. If you're black, you face discrimination, racism. It's just much harder to achieve that American dream. And I hear this all the time from activists and politicians. Star Parker once believed it. Now she runs the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. And you believed it, and you were on welfare and said, I'm helpless, give me stuff.
Yeah, I bought the lie of the left. Everything they say today, poor people are poor because the wealthy are wealthy. My problems are somebody else's fault. America's so racist, I got very lost, very reckless, criminal activity, drug activity, sexual activity, ended up 7 years in and out of welfare.
But you were collecting.
I was collecting a lot. I was on the long waiting list to get the Section 8, just watching my life spiral into a little dark hole. And after a Christian conversion, just changed my way. Bought the idea of freedom and opportunity. Went to school, got a degree.
Religion changed you.
Absolutely.
Not going to a libertarian conference.
No, not going. But I have to tell you, I did find out how libertarian I was when I started a business. Now, the Christianity changed my worldview, my moral perspective on life. But once I went into business and I started finding out just how heavy the hand of government was against business owners, I began to trend very, very right.
And obviously government makes it harder. We'll get to that. But is it tougher because you're black?
You know, it's interesting, this narrative of the left.
Before you answer that, let me ask the audience here. Is it tougher for someone to achieve the American dream if they're not white? How many say, yes, it's harder? How many of you say it's not harder? The majority here.
Freedom lovers understand American exceptionalism. They understand the American dream. They understand what we were founded on, the four principles of traditional living, of free markets, of limited roles of government. And so once you grab a hold of that, you can be whatever you want in America. What has happened over the last 50 years is a narrative. A narrative has seeped in that they are born poor, so they're going to die poor in America, and that poverty is somebody else's fault. So they keep this narrative of racism alive. They begin to build within themselves a discouragement, and they don't think that they can mainstream. You know, I spend a lot of time in the housing
on our Facebook response. Ann Callahan writes, the American dream is alive and well if you happen to be born white, straight, and male with wealthy parents.
We keep hearing this, and the reality is just not true. When people look at what's happened in the dynamics with racial division, if you will, it's because of the welfare state concentrating poverty in certain communities, and it's overwhelmingly then hit the poor.
One person said that. The American dream ended when the war on poverty began. Do you believe that?
The American dream for some did end when the war on poverty began. And in particular, it's hit our poorest, our weakest, which disproportionately hits black people, because when you buy the lie that government will take care of you, then you're not going to move into self-sufficiency. And you get then trapped. And when government then begins to reward you for ill behaviors, you are really stuck. It's hard to get out of welfare. I was in there, and I'm telling you, it is very difficult. Once you get in and you find out about all of the other services available, you're committing social suicide to try to escape. Plus, you're also committing a little bit of economic discomfort, because once you leave, your life can become a little bit harder.
You're also discouraged from being married. From 1890 to 1940, the black marriage rate was slightly higher than that of whites?
You're right. Out-of-wedlock birth rates moved from in the 60s from 22% to today's 72%. But these ideas of progressivism, they're equal opportunity destroyers, because white out-of-wedlock birth, let me just tell you this. No, whites, it affected them too. See, this is not about ethnicity is my point. They moved from 3% out-of-wedlock birth rates to 30% today. So it's not about race, even though the left will keep trying to pretend that it is.
Thank you, Star Parker. Another enemy of the American dream, evil monopolists who prevent entrepreneurs from achieving their dream. And one of those evil monopolists, according to the government, joins us next. The founder of one business achieved his American dream by creating a hugely successful supermarket chain that focuses on what they call healthier and more natural food. And that founder is John Mackey, who began Whole Foods. I've annoyed him for years by arguing that most of the health claims made by these organic people and it's just natural, it's just nonsense. But so let me poll you. John says natural and organic foods lead to healthier and longer lives. Do you agree? How many agree with me who think that most of these natural and organic claims are just a con job? Boy, I'm disappointed. I think you won that one.
We'll put it to the empirical test.
We're both alive.
Well, I will be. We'll see how your audience does over time. And are you, if you're against natural foods, you're saying you're for artificial foods then?
It's all chemicals. Botulism is natural. But look, we're not going to debate healthy food today. Instead, we focus on something that the government says gets in the way of people they're achieving their American dream, monopolies. You know, the greedy business buys up the competitors or ruthlessly undercuts them, and then it gets so big it can charge whatever it wants and nobody can compete with them. That's why we need anti-monopoly laws, the Federal Trade Commission. And they sued you for being a monopolist.
I know, it's unbelievable. They said we were a monopoly of premium and natural organic food supermarkets, which, I mean, we invented it. Our argument was that, I mean, Safeway, Kroger, Walmart, Costco, Sprouts, Trader Joe's, all these guys sell products similar to ours. There's no barriers to entry. It's a very competitive market.
But you lost. You had to sell 32 stores.
Well, I mean, we spent over $30 million in legal expenses. We won in the courts, but the Federal Trade Commission has their own courts. And they told us after we won in the federal courts that they were going to take us to their courts. And I asked our attorneys, what's that going to cost? And they said, well, to get that all the way to prove your innocence probably cost you another $100 million. So we did the math, and we compromised.
Is there ever a time when there should be prosecution of a monopoly?
Absolutely. Take the public school system, for example.
Your point is that it can only really be a monopoly when there's government force involved.
Sure. Capitalism is so dynamic and so competitive that you can get temporary competitive advantages, but people come along and imitate that. They innovate, they leapfrog beyond you, and you don't need the government to protect people from monopolies because the market protects people from monopolies.
Not long ago, the government said General Motors was a monopoly.
Nobody
could compete with them.
I mean, they were always talking about breaking up General Motors, and last time I checked, they actually went bankrupt. I don't know how a monopoly could go bankrupt.
Now they say Google is a monopoly.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the boogeyman, somebody that has a temporary competitive advantage. You take Microsoft, I mean, we'll never know for sure unless Bill Gates writes his memoir someday, but it was pretty soon after his antitrust case with the DOJ that he decided, you know what, I'm the richest man in the world, I can be hated and have my name dragged through the mud and stay as the CEO of Microsoft, or I can become a philanthropist and everybody will love me. And certainly the Gates Foundation's done a lot of good stuff in the world,
but you would say they did more good making money.
Microsoft has made our lives better in many ways. So, and what has Microsoft really done since Bill Gates retired?
Now you could get sued for being a monopoly if your prices are too low, that's predatory pricing, or if they're too high, which is monopolistic pricing, or if they're the same as competitors, and that's collusion.
Or all of the above. And I think that's how they want it. I mean, everybody, if all businesses are guilty of some kind of anti-competitive practices, then you can persecute business anytime you want to. And that's, I think, the way the government likes it.
Thank you, John Mackey, a rare businessman who defends free markets. And next, the biggest threat to the American dream. Back with more from Freedom Fest. Tonight's guests have been skeptical of some so-called obstacles to the American dream. But there's one thing that really does get in the way of the dream, and that's government. When government grows, freedom to try things shrinks, and big government just kills many an American dream. And that's why the Cato Institute's Chris Edwards and Dan Mitchell gave a talk at this conference earlier called Human Progress and Downsizing Government. So this has been your theme for a long time, but it gets in the way of human progress?
Oh, absolutely. The federal government, $4 trillion in spending this year. It's got 2,300 different subsidy programs. All of those subsidy programs.
That creates human progress.
No. All those subsidy programs they cause damage and they harm the economy. They make people dependent. They reduce our freedom. And I'll give you one example. I mean, farmers, they're happy to get $20 billion a year from the government, but it reduces their freedom because with the spending comes all these regulations on what farmers can farm and how many acres and all this sort of stuff. So federal spending comes with regulations. It reduces our freedom. That's in addition to all the damage that the taxes do.
People don't get that. Spending is spending for job training, for food stamps that help people achieve the dream.
You have to look at the difference between intentions and results. Every dollar the government spends, they have to get it from someplace. They either tax it out of the private economy, borrow it, or they just print money and debase the existing currency. As government gets big in terms of consuming more and more of our economic output, the growth rate falls. There's a reason why countries like France and Italy grow slower than us. But there's also a reason why Hong Kong and Singapore grow faster. There's a very clear negative relationship between human progress, i.e. economic growth, and the size of government.
And America grew fastest when we had a little government.
Oh, that's right. In fact, government spending was under 4% of the economy all the way up through Calvin Coolidge in the 1920s. It was the 1930s that made all the difference. It was the invention of Keynesian economics, the invention of so-called entitlement programs.
We grew
that made
faster
government
before
explode.
the 1930s?
Absolutely we did. We grew
but
much
we had
faster.
The Depression.
We had recessions, but the government stayed out of it, and we always recovered very quickly. Like there was a big recession in the early 1920s, Harding, and then Coolidge didn't do anything about it, and the economy recovered very quickly and started growing.
People say, without big government, we destroy the planet.
No, in fact, a lot of federal spending damages the environment. California's had this terrible drought. It is partly the responsibility of the federal government that has been subsidizing water for a century now. It's caused overconsumption. Farmers are farming things they shouldn't be farming. They're over-consuming water. So that is one of the roots of the problem here, that subsidies cause distortion and economic damage. Some of the biggest polluters have been federal government agencies.
Now, a lot of Republicans are saying we have to balance the budget. Dan, you say that's not politically realistic, and we don't even have to balance the budget.
If you say balance the budget, the average politician will say, sure, I'll raise your taxes. What we really need to focus on is simply having government grow slower than the private sector over time. Countries that have done that have been very, very successful. There's a big, long list of them. Whereas if you say to the leftist friends, oh, hey, show us your list of countries that have had success with raising taxes, they don't have anything. They have countries like Greece and France and Italy.
But you're saying don't shrink government? It just needs to, it'll continue to grow just more slowly than the economy?
Well, look, at the Cato Institute, we want government to shrink dramatically, but here's all we need to do to make progress. Just have it grow at, say, 2% a year if the private sector is growing 3 or 4% a year. You maintain that for any significant period of time, and the burden of government will shrink as a share of GDP.
And amazingly, for every year since the 30s, government has grown more than inflation and population growth.
And, you know, our debt now is far higher than it has ever been in our peacetime history. It's, as Thomas Jefferson and James Madison thought, it's immoral, it's bad for the economy, and it's corrupting, and we ought to end it.
Thank you, Chris Edwards and Dan Mitchell. Next, someone much more optimistic about the American dream than I am. So good for him. We're back at Freedom Fest talking about the American dream. We heard just now how government often kills it, and it does. And government keeps growing. This depresses me, but Grover Norquist keeps smiling. The president of Americans for Tax Reform has fought for lower taxes and tax simplification for 30 years, and you failed. It's less simple than it ever was. Taxes are often higher. Why are you so cheerful all the time?
We have a majority of the members of the House who've made a written commitment to the American people they'll never vote for a tax increase. They keep that. We haven't had a tax increase as long as the Republicans controlled the House of Representatives. We've stopped the bleeding on tax increases as long as they can hold on to one part of the government. When we went head-to-head with Obama in 2011, he wanted $2.5 trillion and more debt, wanted trillions in higher taxes. The Republicans said, no tax increase, period. We got $2.5 trillion in spending restraint. We won that fight. Spending went from 23% of GDP down to 20, and we've held. That's the federal government. We stopped the bleeding. Takes new leadership.
With this sequester law that a lot of politicians say, oh, we have to get rid of that.
Good news is they're not going to get rid of it. It's the one big victory that the American people had against this onrush of TARP and stimulus and Obamacare early on in the Obama administration. But you want to see where we're winning? Look to the states. You want to see freedom flourish? Homeschooling was illegal in all states 30 years ago. Today, 2 million Americans are being homeschooled. 10 million have been. That's breaking into the government monopoly. 30 years ago, no states had shall issue concealed carry permits, where the government had to give you a permit to carry concealed if you were 21 and honest. Today, 41 states have shall issue. All states allow at least may issue concealed carry permits. 12 million Americans have a concealed carry permit.
To me, the clearest outrage is the complexity, how long it takes just to understand your taxes. That's getting worse.
We have 9 states with no income tax. We have states like Kansas and North Carolina, which are on a path to get rid of their state income taxes. The states competing with each other, people leave California and New York and move to Texas and Florida. People are moving to low tax states, which ought to give us a hint as to where they want to go. But it empowers the low tax, limited government, better governed states. How else are we changing the country? 401ks, IRAs. About half the country now has defined contribution pensions, 401ks, IRAs. They're owning shares of stock.
But even these breaks make things more complex. 1 in 3 small businesses says they spend more than 80 hours per year just on federal taxes.
Well, I'm not arguing things are good. Things are very bad. We started in 1774 as colonists. We were paying 1 to 2% of our income in taxes. The British were thinking of going to 3, and we brought the guns out. Okay, so we're now at about 30% being taken federal, state, and local. So there's been some backsliding. But I would argue that what we've done at the state level is build the case and look at school choice. Okay, we now have education savings accounts, which are really a dynamic form of vouchers. We just passed this in Nevada. the most
in this
robust,
state, the biggest voucher program in the country.
Okay, it's huge. The government monopoly in this state is fading as a monopoly because Arizona, Indiana, Louisiana, Nevada, Florida, Wisconsin, a number of states have very robust school choice efforts. And the other team's argument was, if you don't run everything inside the public school monopoly, there'll be Wiccan schools, and they'll do organ harvesting of the kids in private schools, and all sorts of horror stories, and people got scared. Well, now that there are enough people with enough experiments in enough of the states, people realize that's nonsense. The movement towards liberty at the state level, I think it's tough to stop. Here's the advantage we have over statists. Truly stupid things can only be done out of Washington, D.C. You can't do Obamacare in Vermont alone. Bad ideas, truly bad ideas, only can be put in Obamacare at the national level. Because we have divided
where
government.
Where there's no competition.
Where there's no competition, and if everybody's suffering, it's not really clear what did it. Who knows what it was? Maybe it's the weather.
Technology is making things better.
Uber, for instance. Who thought we could take on the taxi commissions, which require $100,000 medallions to drive a taxi, which restrict that? Self-employed people beating the taxi cab commissions. Airbnb. People can decide, I think I'll be a small business person all by myself. The post office. How are you going to deal with it? Email. And the size and power of the post office shrinks as people use email. Online sales have broken down and allowed for more competition.
Thank you, Grover Norquist. We're all better off because of Americans for tax reform.
Thank you.
And coming up, maybe we should be optimistic about the American dream, because throughout history, the pessimists like me have repeatedly been proven wrong. Is the American dream still alive? It's hard to be optimistic about our financial future walking around this conference, because so many people here are promoting buying gold, and they say things like, sleep at night knowing your assets are safe. And hey, they have a point, because our politicians keep promising people more free stuff, so much more than taxpayers could ever fund, that I assume that these paper dollars that I have here, I mean, these will someday be worth pennies. People forget that since the Fed was created just 100 years ago, the dollar's lost 96% of its value. So I bought some gold and silver. I know gold and silver, they'll hold their value more than these pieces of paper the government calls dollar bills. Except, so far, I've lost money on my gold and silver investments. How many of you have invested in gold? Unless you bought it way back, you haven't done so well. So when will inflation explode? It's still low. Who knows? These predictions are risky. I assume it has to explode sometime, because there's just not enough money for what they've said they'll give to people. But this pessimism about America's future has been a bad bet. In school today still, students study Paul Samuelson's textbooks to learn economics. But in the 80s, Samuelson taught, although the American economy approaches Soviet growth, the planned Soviet economy has outpaced major market economies. What? This is utterly wrong. And yet Samuelson is still the text that students are forced to buy. It's good to be skeptical when Samuelson and other experts predict America's future. And when pessimists like me say, oh, it's the regulation now, there's more all the time, that's killing the American dream, be skeptical. And Facebook, Matthew Keller posted, my wife's an immigrant, so only been here 4 years. In that time, she makes more money than a lot of Americans. What people don't realize is that to succeed, you must take risks. Taking risks, that's a good point. This is a country that evolved differently from Europe. For some reason, America became a place where if you try something and fail, it's okay. People will even lend you money so you can try again. In Europe and Asia, people often say, what, you failed? Go work for someone. You had your chance. But America is more tolerant of trial and error. We know about Thomas Edison's success with the light bulb, but few people know that Edison failed hundreds of times. He was fired by the telegraph office. He lost money on a cement company and an iron business. Henry Ford's first company failed completely. Dr. Seuss's first book was rejected by 27 publishers. Oprah was fired from her first job as a reporter. A TV station called her unfit for TV. They all failed and tried again. America's a place where, as Dinesh D'Souza puts it, you can write the script of your own life. So when pessimists like me say, idiot, burdensome government regulation and high taxes have killed opportunity, I hope you will ignore me and prove me wrong. That's our show for tonight from Las Vegas and Freedom Fest. Go live the American dream.